Hello, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Um, this is our fifth and final lecture in our fall speaker series on multifamily home solutions, which is really exciting. Thank you all for coming out on a dark and snowy evening, or joining us online. Um, we are super excited to have Sandy here from the Plainfield Village Expansion Project talk about what that group of people is doing, which I think is particularly interesting as a little case study of community action and engagement and development. So um, hope you enjoy it. Feel free to ask questions. This will take about an hour, and then if you want to hang out and mingle afterwards, feel free um, to hang out. We have some cookies over here. Feel free to have some cookies and refreshments. If you are a resident of Washington County, you can join our Standby for Locals list. That list offers classes that we have seats left in sort of on a short notice basis to that list at half off. So it's a good discount. The trade-off is that it's usually shorter notice. So definitely join that if you haven't already. And we are a nonprofit. We welcome your donations to sustain free programming like this for our community. So with that, I will let Sandy take it away.
Thank
Sandy.
you. So I'm a Montpelier, not native, because I was actually born in Haight-Ashbury in the 60s. But my parents were from Vermont. And so I've lived here most of my life. And I'm an architect. And I would say we're focusing tonight on the very specific time, place, people of Plainfield, Vermont. But within that little nexus of all these, you know, reality, there's all of these associated issues. And I could go on for hours talking about what I've learned and my own interest. And please feel free to rein me in because it is really easy. There's so many aspects. So just to say briefly, there's the land aspect, there's the permitting aspect, there's the financing of a construction, there's finding people, there's just so many different the whole issue of prefabrication, which Esther Moore is really good at. And in fact, you may know more than I do about some of these things. So I put together a slideshow that is meant to be very brief and just a smattering of these ideas around so that we could focus on the specifics of East Village. This is a picture of a rendering we did for the East Village Center. I'll show you a site plan later. But let me start by saying I have a clear goal or mission here. It could actually be a mission, which is when I became a grandparent a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, I noticed that my two older sons were able to buy very modest houses, but they could buy houses. And already those houses have grown at 50% since 2020 in their value. So those kids have an asset. It's like $500,000 now. The younger one was in college, so he didn't do that. And he may never get a house. And if you just look at everything else being equal, that is phenomenally impactful. And the other major issue is that I have a lot of friends who want to downsize and they can't because it's literally impossible to find a smaller home. So there's like one person living in a very large house in Montpelier, and that holds up families from getting the houses they need. So how do we solve that? I'm going to make steps that for me, it's a matter of democracy that Vermont, oh, I'm going to start talking before my slides, but there, there are a lot of things tied into this for me. So Americans are used to big homes on big lots, and Vermont is above average in the United States, particularly lot size. And part of it is because we have so much rural land that, a lot of people own 10 acres or more. But if you look at the average house size, 2,000 square feet in the United States, in what we would consider equal economies, they're much smaller. And India is like 450 square feet. So the amount of space that we're used to that we feel is normal is one of our biggest impediments to the problem of solving housing right now. I talk to people who say they're building small houses, and I say, "Oh, how big? 1,600 square feet." Oh, well, I think you could fit 4 families in there. So this is a major cultural thing that has possibilities for changing. And everybody here already knows this probably, but our climate disasters, we tend to settle in places that are easy to build and they had water power 150 years ago. But we're losing that land. And then the land that is not in the floodplains tends to be steep. It tends to have wet, marshy soils called the hydric soils. And it tends to be very difficult to develop. So kind of habitable land is getting very scarce. And it doesn't help that people are speculating rampantly in Vermont and actually throughout New England. People buy land and then they don't even use it. People buy multiple houses that are already built. Unfortunately, there's a lot of discussions about this. I'm sure you have them at Yes Tomorrow. But should land really be seen as a saleable commodity? This statistic is the one that really jumps out for me. That in 2021, which is a year after COVID started, almost a third of people rented had enough money that they could buy a house if they wanted to. In other words, a third of people renting were doing that by choice. We don't know about the other 2/3 and if they're doing it by choice or not, but they could have very quickly bought a house if they wanted to. And that number's down to 6% now. That's tremendous that most people renting actually do not have enough equity or income to buy a house.
Is that because the cost of housing has gone up so much, or that their income has stagnated? Do you know which side it's affecting?
Yes.
Both. Okay.
And it's interesting because this is not entirely true in the rest of the United States. It is somewhat true, and there is a housing shortage in the rest of the United States, but it's especially bad from the income point of view in Vermont. Now, I do not want to be negative about the current two solutions, but my observation is that they both have shortcomings. So the first one is subsidized apartments, and the second is shared equity homes. And so they are both important programs in Vermont. The problem I see is that they do have problems, but it's so like people see the crisis as being so acute that they just jump onto those two tracks to move forward. And they're like deep ruts now. A lot of money, huge amounts of money are going into subsidized housing, a little less, but growing amount going into shared equity homes. And there's a whole program available. But that rut means it's hard to try anything else as a model of development. And to give you a sense of how crazy the rut is and how fast the money's flowing through, these apartments were considered inexpensive. They were privately developed in South Burlington. They were $350,000 a piece 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now. And the typical downstreet apartment right now is $600,000 to build for an apartment. And we are looking at units that are 150,000. So you could probably build, if you did small prefab houses, 3 to 4 of them compared to 1 unit here. That just blows my mind that money is going so fast. And this is an important statistic here. So this is 47 units. Think about what this building needs. Concrete and steel, most likely for fireproofing. It has a whole fire suppression system because it's 5 stories tall. It has to have an elevator. It has to have gurney-sized elevators so that a structure can be taken out of the building. It has probably has standpipes for fighting fire inside the building. That's why they cost $600,000. Well, this was 350 2 years ago. That's why they cost so much. If you can take a prefab building and pop it down on some kind of foundation, you don't have to have all of those dense living things. So it actually costs a lot less to build as long as you can get close to the same density use of the land. But then, so they accumulated a huge amount of money. There are actually 2 of these on this project. So they accumulated $50 million to build these 2 buildings. And they're only assessed at $7 million each. So if you think about the delta of funding that the state and the federal government dumped into this, and these apartments are a variety of subsidized, which is still really high, and market rate apartments. So what's happening out of this is that the private developer is saying, this is the only way we're going to do this. And the public is saying, we need the housing. And so the government entities are throwing their money into this trench, into this rut, the pipeline to push out housing at the other end. It's a lot of money. And the developer, what they get out of it is the building and the land, which they depreciate on a 27-year cycle. They're not having to put much money in it up front, but they get the building out of it. And if they don't keep it up, it becomes a slum in 30 years. So we don't know how. I can't assume that they're going to do that, but it's a very different model from people being able to build equity over time.
Have you done research to verify that there are other dynamics at play, like in other buildings, other places that have this unbelievable discrepancy between the amount that it costs to build and the assessed amount? I mean, that's like, I can't even.
A lot of people don't know this. Do you know, are any of you familiar with the French block, which is also called the Aubuchon block in Montpelier on Main Street? Please don't quote me on these numbers, but it costs millions and millions of dollars, and the apartments are assessed at like 10% of their value. So that one, yep.
Oh, so just for the basic math, 47 units at $500,000 each, which is what you listed. Cost per unit, say 500,000. That's between 4 and 6. So 47 units sold would be 23.5 million. Normally, how I associate property taxes or value, I think, is that would be 23.5 million. Oh, but these are rentals.
So what's happening is the company that owns the building negotiated tax abatement perpetually.
So it's an artificially dropped assessment, is that correct? Or is it actually?
It's artificially abated perpetually, which becomes a burden on the town. So this is not only a model for people never building up equity, it's also a model for a town that have to keep supplying services to this building, including a high fire truck, a high ladder truck because it's 5 stories high. But they're not getting money for their municipal services. And it's interesting, I don't know if you've ever talked to well, he's a developer, but he's also the town manager in St. Albans, Dominic Cloud. He spoke recently at the development conference in Burlington. He will not abate properties. I think he probably does a little bit, but that's his last effort. He will give people land, but he's smart because as a town manager, he's not bringing down the health of the future income of the municipality. But that is often demanded from a town to do that. And on top of it, I don't think the land was given away here, but in Montpelier right now, they need to give away a $3 million piece of land. So this delta is kind of the lifeblood and the sweat of a lot of different entities. Taxpayers are paying for it, the municipalities are paying for it at the state and the federal level. is making up that delta. So again, I think we need everything in the toolkit to solve the housing problem. I don't have a problem with it, but if it gets to be too much in a town, the town can't afford it, really. What is too much for a town varies. South Burlington, where this is located, they have a huge amount of, they have all the malls, they have a lot of commerce, retail, fashions. They don't own the airport anymore, but you see what I mean? Their tax base is gigantic. So they could, this is a drop in the bucket for them. But a town like Montpelier or a town like Waitsfield, this is a huge burden. In Plainfield, the 40 lots that we're working on are a tenth of the entire tax brand list for the town. So if it were to be a subsidized apartment, which was discussed, they would be removing 10% of their perpetual tax incomes. It's tremendous. I don't want to get too far into this because we want to talk about design tonight, but it's important to know these things as you go up. But oddly, the housing groups such as Downstreet and Evernorth are really pushing this model because the pipeline pushes money through quickly. They can get the houses done quickly. They're not bad people. They're trying to get houses built. But for instance, are you familiar with the project that did not pass in Greensboro? It was an Evernorth project, 26 units. 26 is their magic number. It would have been a tremendous burden on that town to if that project had gotten built. And there was no option of doing 5 or 10 units. The other is shared equity. And I've had a lot of arguments with Habitat and Downstreet on this. And the very simple story of this is that the person who wants to buy the house and they can take the house to Downstreet or Downstreet could be selling it. They get $80,000 up front to buy the house. It gets knocked off of the mortgage principal, which is great. And then you sign on a perpetual easement, a conservation easement, that you will give up 75% of any accrued value of the house. It goes back to the trust. And you have to occupy it 100% of the building. You can't rent out any part. So those are key things for people to build equity, and you give them away in order to get some. But what happens is that usually people end up buying too much house for what they need. And in fact, Downstreet told me that they will not do this program for 1-bedroom houses, which is astounding, but I understand why they can't. When you get a mortgage, it depends on having comparables, and not enough 1-bedroom houses are being built now. So it takes longer to sell a 1-bedroom house because of this whole comparable issue. The solution, I think, is to build more 1-bedroom houses. But right now, they're downright against small houses. So people end up buying 2 or 3-bedroom houses, which are more than they need or afford in order to get into the program.
And which program is that? Downstreet?
Downstreet shared equity, and Evernorth is very similar. So what is going on and what are the other solutions? I did a survey and I actually have some extra copies of it back here if anyone's interested afterwards. But we did a survey that we had 145 people that wanted to move in Montpelier. 260 people responded, of them 145 wanted to move. But one of the things is that we have very small households in central Vermont. And a 3 or 4-bedroom house, which is standard here, is really too big. And if you sign an easement that says you can't rent out any part of it, you have a lot of house that you have to support and pay, maintain. And the other thing is,
Are they allowed to rent it if they're also living there?
no, you have to own or occupy 100%.
So they can't just rent a room?
No,
That seems very short-sighted.
especially if the building is so much bigger than you need.
Yeah, we're not gonna have single occupancy houses, but also you can't rent. Just, yeah, anyway. How long is the
how long do you have to live there or not be able to rent? Is there a time?
It's perpetual. So one interesting statistic is that 60% of people that buy share equity houses leave them within 5 years. And they're taking away with them the $80,000 gift and going away. The next owner gets some amount of subsidy carried over, but it's often, again, it's too much of a house for them. So in the survey, it's the same survey I did. This is what was really important because Montpelier, even in our municipal plan, we talk about only about apartments. If you look at it, it says build apartments. Doesn't say anything about owner occupied homes. And Plainfield had a similar proportion that almost 80% of people would actually prefer to own the house. And it could be a small multifamily. People are very happy to own and rent part of it out, but they really want to own it. They want to build equity. And I've done a lot of interviews with people who work in modest places like Hunger Mountain Co-op and Vermont Compost are the two main ones. And they, even if it's small, even if it's 300 square feet and doesn't have a bedroom, they would rather own it. They would rather build equity over time. And they can build onto it over time if they 100% own it. So this was a funny statistic that more people in that survey would rather live in a yurt than in a large apartment building. One woman who had 2 kids, I said, well, if 3 of you, how would you live in a 350 square foot home? It's a cabin with no bedrooms. And she looked right at me and she said, we would rather sleep there than in a car. So I think it's time, this is now I'm speaking my opinion. I think it's time for Vermont and Americans in general to rethink our needs for space. Land is a similar thing. In this survey, we said, how much do you need? Not how much would you dream of having? And most people, well, this is kind of equal, but most people needed something. We don't even zone for this small lot in Montpelier. We zone for 30,000 square feet is the smallest we zone for, which is like a 15th of an acre. So these 2 lots would have to be conditional permitting, which means they'll be appealed by the neighbors and never get built. So our zoning system is kind of screwed up. The picture I showed you at the beginning, those are 25th of an acre to 20th of an acre. So right in this area. And everyone who looked at that picture in the Plainfield, the Plainfield people designed that in the chart, which I'll talk about soon. But they also loved it when they actually saw the 3D drawing. Like, this is where we want to live. But they want to own it. They don't want to rent it. And they don't want a condo, especially if having a condo compromises your mortgage. All right, so the other thing is that most developers will design a 2-car garage and people don't even have 2 cars. So what could a house look like? People at the community workshop that we had in Plainfield designed much denser lots than we had even considered. We had the minimum at 1/10 of an acre, and they went right down to a 20th to 25th acre. There are some tricks, which I'm sure you guys can know. If you can put cars in the alley in the back and then leave the front for walking. And so many people in the community want that kind of layout. They actually say we don't need a car at all. Just put the parking lot over here and we'll walk in. I recently led a workshop for middle school students and they had a great idea of having golf carts, which if you've heard of Celebration, the big village, or it's called the Villages down in Florida, they get around by golf carts. So it might look like that. This is Ocean Springs in Florida. These are very small houses. They're called Katrina cottages. Now, we will look at this as builders and say, that is a lot of exterior trim. That is not affordable. Well, one thing that's very interesting, and this happened, have you heard of Oak Bluffs in Nantucket? Really wonderful camp community. And they're full of gingerbread, right? They started off as tents. They were tent sites. And people were there for the summer. They brought their pools with them. And they went crazy with gingerbread, learning from each other over the years. And that's why it's such an amazingly detailed, intricate, it's a labor of love. So these were built by builders, but you could imagine a much simpler starter block that keeps weather out and that people could add over time and they could help each other. Notice how small the front yards are, and then notice there's no car in the front. So when I did my survey, I could get right to that. You could see the problem. When you ask people separate from what they, the reality of their budget, what they want, the median actually is almost exactly what the median houses in Montpelier and Sandra around Plainfield area. And the median budget is much lower. So I'll give you an example of talking to a woman at a bank. She actually worked at a bank and she said, I'm so frustrated. I live by myself. I want a 2-bedroom house. I'd like a quarter of an acre and I can't find anything I can afford. I'm so angry. I'm going to move out of Vermont. So we talked, and in less than 10 minutes, she grasped the issue that she wanted too much house and too much land. And if there were anything available that was a small 1-bedroom on a small lot, she could afford it and she would buy it. So if you can talk to people directly, this goes very fast. Or so people are very realistic and practical, and they understand reality. So that's the as an extension of this and getting into the design for we did recently in Montpelier, I actually took their desires that blended, that matched their budgets and made a spreadsheet so we could say, okay, we need in the affordable category, which is about $300 a square foot, we need 2 0-bedrooms that only have a porch. And we need 5 that have a 30 acre, 2 that have a 15 acre. Moving up to people who have enough money to maybe spend $500 a square foot. That these people all wanted 2-bedroom houses, except for a couple with 3 bedrooms. But it's interesting that the heaviest numbers are 1 and 2 bedrooms, whereas developers build 3 to 4 bedrooms. In fact, a lot of developers will tell you you can't sell a 2-bedroom house. And then I also created in Plainfield a little calculator so that if someone knew what their budget was, say they go to the bank and you get pre-approved, they could figure out where in the spectrum they want to be. Do they want more house and less land? Whatever. We had a fair, and I brought some of the brochures with me if anybody wants some. We had 26 exhibitors, and yes, Samara was there. And we ranged from turnkey homes to nearly turnkey homes to shells and panels and frames. Shells would be SIPs typically. We're just starting work on cross-laminated timber products. Also prefab homes, well, I guess and we could get down the prefab, the manufactured homes, which one also calls a trailer, could get down to $90,000. We could actually hit 50% median income homes, 1 or 2 person houses, with no subsidies. Think about that. No subsidies compared to the model you sell of the big apartment building, which is what, 2/3 subsidized. So you could build multiple units for the same cost as 1 subsidized apartment. And these are units that people could buy without any extra help. So I am personally interested in cross-laminated timber. we're trying to get a plant built in Vermont or New Hampshire. Right now, you have to get the panels brought over from Illinois, I think, or Indiana. So now to the subject we wanted to talk about. We laid this out as a typical developer would, just so that we could guesstimate what the cost would be. And then in February, we had a citizen workshop. And we had 50 people come, and I think there were 9 groups, and they boiled down to 6. And all kinds of variations, but the main thing was what I experienced, and I've seen this again in other workshops, is that citizens think about dwelling together as a group. They're not thinking as much about what the profit is going to be. And so in Plainfield, this is all wet over here, and down here is wetland. That is all steep. So they thought about this is how could we, in the villages, you can see the quarter of the village up there. This is a cliff here. So the way to get down was to get, that's Main Street. So to get down to Main Street. And as I mentioned, they went much denser with houses than we had anticipated people would want. This is the angle of that photograph I showed on the first slide. But there were 1, 2, 3 clusters of these very small lots, and they matched the market profile, because we already had 40 people on a list that would like to buy a lot. So they said 1/3 very small lots, 1/3 small lots, and then 1/3 kind of small market, normal market size lots. So the expensive ones were the view lots on the edge and by the main city. We did, as I said, 1/3 of these are very small, and then the other 1/3 are in between. And all of these could take a duplex, like a Habitat for Humanity duplex. In fact, they asked for 5 lots. And but the key thing was how would people have a sense of community and walk around? So they put in things that a developer would never put in, right? They put in a community orchard, a community garden, food, a farm stand, senior housing on top of a community room. They wanted to have a laundry and a small cafe where you basically can make your own coffee, an activity room for homeschool kids, and the laundry was key. And also doctors could come in and have clinics there. So they figured this out in 3 hours. And we actually, and then this large common area. Oh, and one fun detail was they thought they would put gates across the road so that if there's something special going on, other people could drive this way, and this could be closed off for, complete pedestrian access. There is a large pedestrian path back to the town this way, and they also designed trails going through the wetlands, which is a question about how developed those could be. So they gave it a lot more common area than a developer would. But then because they had so many smaller lots, the numbers actually worked out fine. we can come back to this, but I want to show you the number and how this model works. So this model is an ownership model where the town would only sell the lots. And we would help people who don't have enough equity to build their house. They're trying to build up a revolving loan fund from the sale of the land so that people can have enough money to actually get the house on the land and then go to a bank for a mortgage. It's very hard for someone who doesn't have savings to get a construction loan. So we didn't need subsidies for the houses, don't need subsidies for purchasing the land. The one thing that there's a shortfall is in the infrastructure. And the question about that is why this land is lucky that has water and sewer right up at the edge of the property. But most properties, let's say in Warren and Waitsfield, there's no water and there's no septic. So they have to figure out how to do a communal septic system, communal well, and that's about where people give up usually. There are some systems, I'm gonna forget the name of the communal septic systems is really cool. That it freezes sewage, and out of it you actually get fertilizer that is clean, that is not got, medications in it and heavy metals. It's all been separated out, so it's actually, you can use it for organic farming. Can't believe forgot the name of that system. They're located in southern Vermont. In a well, this is a little fact for the future. In Vermont, you can have 24 bedrooms on one well without having to treat the water. If you have to treat the water, you're looking at a very expensive, like usually a UV filtration system. So 24 bedrooms is the limit per well, but then usually the septic system begins to overlap and give up. So having water and sewer was really nice. There are ways to do this, looking in Greensboro, for example, at how to get a community septic system on. But in terms of the finances, this shortfall would normally stop the project. Again, it doesn't have the rut or the pipeline of funding coming through from the federal government. And there's no one powerful asking for it because there's no developer involved. This is just the town. But they have created something called a TIF. Have you all heard of that? It's a form of a municipal bond where you take the new taxable income and it's held out and it pays off the bond in 20 years. And for 2 projects now, I've looked at this and it actually works. So in Plainfield, this project would generate $12 million of tax basis. Think about that. The apartment building with 47 units, so it's approximately the same number of units, is only generating $7 million of taxable value in Burlington. This will generate 12 million because these little houses would pay full ride for taxes, no tax subsidy. So they could actually pay off the bond in 10 years, or they could borrow less money and pay it up. Sorry.
So 12 million in 10 years?
So the increment, the tax increment of roughly 12 million could pay off this bond, because it gets complicated. You take apart both the state and the town, retain part of that new tax revenue, and that goes to pay down the bond. That percentage could be reduced, pay it down and over a longer period of time, so that the town is getting more retainage. This is getting in the weeds. But my point is that a bond, which is not a subsidy, is a bond, can actually work to make the numbers pencil out. And I'm working on a smaller project on Goddard's campus right now. I don't know why I did this, but north is to the left. Very confusing. But this would be between 8 and 10 very small lots with a 30th of an acre. And this one has almost no infrastructure costs. That's really key. All this is 2 parking lots. And then they have to get water, and their water and sewer are right here, and power is right here too. So we have to ditch that through and tie up. It can be gravity, so they don't have to pay for a pump station. So this is actually affordable. And then these 8 or 10 people would pay that share of the infrastructure, or they might try to get a chip tip for it. And if we could do this, this is trying to find housing for the people who were flooded out. This could be faster than the East Village project. This might work.
Is owning that, or how's the stars?
They sold the whole campus in May to a group called Ledgeworks. Did you want to say something? I think that might, so there are challenges coming up. This would be the same challenges you would face if you were trying to do this. Again, zoning doesn't really talk about housing. It's a, agricultural district. Act 250, ability for neighbors to appeal. So we don't really have a clean legal model for how do people maintain the common areas like that path or the parking lots. A condo association is the most common way, but is there a way to avoid that? If you could build all of those foundations at the same time, so say you pre-sold the lots, so you know who's going to build it and they know what they want to build. If you could just clear the land, put down all 10 foundations or helical piles or whatever at once, put the land back, and then raise it, all the superstructures or drop them down, whatever. That would be really a huge, huge savings, somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 a lot. And then the buildings themselves we use that house fair as a way to talk about what are all the suppliers coming online. There's one factory in Barry and one in Groveton, New Hampshire that are just gearing up and they're building houses between 100 and 150,000. And then of course, new frameworks. And then how does the cash flow work? So these are the things we're working on now. Oh, here it is, Brightwater Tools. I really hope that can take off because that is such a challenge right now. And I think that's it. So I'll go back to this and I talked for 45 minutes. Sorry, it's kind of long. There we go. This is what you really wanted to talk about. So any questions I can answer? And tell me if you're interested in any of this, what your angle is, if you're interested in the house part of it or getting a small group of people together to own land. I don't know if you heard of 10 Stones up in Shelburne, that the 10 families came together and they bought one piece of land and they cooperatively own it. Anything that I've covered tonight, I'm glad to talk about.
I'm curious about the town itself and their involvement or
yes,
or
that is so 110, 130 years ago, it was really common for towns to subdivide. And they were called subscriptions. They would sell the lots, and from the money from the lots, they would build the roads. And that was it. They didn't have sewage treatment plants. And I don't know how they dealt with water, but that was a very normal model. And it is so strange to me that towns have become very passive about developing. And the number one fear is liability. And the other number one fear is that nobody else has done it. So it's a beautiful model because a town can hold land, they're just not getting they don't have to pay taxes on it themselves. But in this case, they wouldn't hold it, they would buy it right before construction begins. But the town can do this and they don't need to make a profit. So developer profit is a major cost. So one thing we did is we took what people can afford, let's say 50 percentile, which is very low. When I'm talking about this, I'm talking about the percentage of median income. So let's say for a one person household, let's say 2-person household, I think 80th percentile is something like $70,000, which is actually a lot of money for many families in central Vermont. That's 80% of median income. Down to 50 might be like $40,000. So how much house can those people afford? I wish I brought that chart, but it's somewhere between $150,000 and $250,000, way below the median house price of $350,000. So if you're trying to get a house between 150 to 250, what are the components? We know the house itself is probably going to be between 90 and 150. So either the land has to be zero, but it may be at the most 30,000. But then you have to pay for all the utilities to hook it up. And then you have to figure out the common areas. So we were working backwards. If you have to add 20% developer cost to that, which on $100,000 home is $20,000, budget shot. You can't do it. And that's a big problem because these Chittenden County developers, the big developers, they want 20 They went 20% profit. And the justification is they're building one type of housing, apartments, so they have a long time before everything's occupied and paying rent. So that is called the rate of absorption. So a developer takes 20 to 25% profit to cover the time that they're holding costs. Does that make sense? So if you have a $50 million project and it's going to take 5 to 8 years to build out, you have to service that loan the whole time. So, but if you a town doesn't need to do that.
So this Plainfield project, was the town the client,
So yes,
and will they acquire the land?
so they have a purchase and sale agreement on it. They have not purchased it yet. So what they would do, the way it works, is you get all the permitting done, you get the final cost of construction, and you have a little green sign that says go. And then you buy the land, you quickly subdivide it, and you sell it. And you've pre-sold, so you know who wants the lots, you know who's getting which lot. So when the green light turns, they just all lots sell. In Vermont, you're now allowed to use that money towards the construction. If people, they had a plan built in for people who couldn't afford to buy the lot, that would be subsidized. Or a loan, or they talked about different ways to deal with that.
And their motivation for doing this project, was it both to provide housing for people who lost their housing in the floods, as well as to create affordable housing?
I should have started off with that. So Plainfield lost 39 dwellings a year and a half ago in the July 2024 flood. And that is 11% of the grand list. But socially speaking, there are only 1,200 people who live in Plainfield. That was a huge percentage of their community was wiped out, right in the middle of the village. So they decided to build an extension of the village on high land. And the initial intention was to prioritize those 40 families here. And in our early list, 14 of them wanted to get a lot. And some of them were going to need help. They had been apartment renters before, but they really wanted to own. And those are the ones I'm talking about, that we were figuring out how to help them over the hump of get to the point where we can get a mortgage. So it has now been a year of talking about it. What happened was we were going to try to start construction last August. And we were going to have people we were figuring out how people could live the winter on the land so they could save money over the winter for their houses. And the grants came up, the federal grants. Have you heard about them? Community block grants for disaster recovery. So they decided to go for the grant. So that's why the project's taking so long. So they didn't start construction in August. If they start it next August, they're going to be lucky. But they're applying for like $6 or $7 million for this. Free money is very enticing. And it will allow them to do this revolving loan fund in a very generous way. And they're actually planning to now give away 12 lots. So not including the Habitat for Humanity lots. It would be very generous at what they could do with the grant, with the funds. So they have delayed the project, which means that the flood people probably can't. I mean, most of them are already figured something out.
The initial photo you showed us, the image,
yeah,
that looked like the homes are very homogeneous. But are you saying that they can purchase these homes anywhere?
Or stick build themselves?
Right.
Yeah,
so they won't
absolutely.
necessarily be homogeneous.
Right.
That's
We chose just because people were curious what people really in Plainfield were very suspicious about what this would look like.
Right.
Because they have no reference for what does a cluster of 4 houses on a 25th of an acre each, what does it look like? And it was very easy because New Frameworks had Revit renderings of everything. Mm-hmm. So that's why we plopped down 4 of their models, and it does look homogeneous. Yeah.
But it won't necessarily
no,
look that way. Yeah.
No, it could be anybody. On the other hand, someone could, these four families could work together. I mean, anything could happen, but the idea in a traditional subdivision was that the market decides what gets built.
So, but there's not like an HOA that says that you have to build this certain way, or anyone can build however they want. So who's to say that like, is there like an ordinance on like how high you can build or how,
Yes,
what
yes.
you can actually
This is
do?
part of the village district, so you can't build more than 35 feet. And a tiny house, it would look funny.
Right,
If it were 30, it would look like it.
Yeah,
Right.
really.
but there will be, like, will there be crutches on the common land or?
Right,
the,
there, right now, there's no, because there's no ordinance in Plainfield. So they don't have any design ordinance whatsoever, and this is just part of the village district. We did talk about limiting this area inside the circle to 1.5 stories or 2 stories. Because sun becomes a huge issue. If you build a 2-story, I don't know if I can go. Here, I just go really fast back to it. This is the only way I know how to do it. You can see the full 2-story in the back. If that were right here, it would really be crowding, and light becomes very important. So there does need to be totally honest, there needs to be some coordination. Even a tree, like we couldn't, this is south is back of this view. You can't really put trees on this side of the road because they wouldn't be able to have a garden. So we put all the trees on this side of the road. A micro village really takes careful planning. We put a lot of trees in the courtyard because again, south is here, north is here. So these trees, when they fully grow, wouldn't block the light in those gardens. Oh,
I must.
I was just wondering about the zoning issues so far, limitation, and that you maybe mentioned that there were 15 or 10, or what's the smallest?
so Plainfield has an ideal situation. I found out as we went along that they have 1/10 of an acre. And there's a law right now in Vermont that if the land has water and sewer, a town cannot require it to be larger than a 1/5 of an acre. So all of the old zoning ordinances for a quarter or acre or more are out the window if it's water and sewer. So Plainfield's is 1/10 of an acre, but if you're doing a planned unit development, you can have as small as you want. So Plainfield zoning ordinance is actually ideal.
You can build as small as you want in Plainfield, Vermont.
Small as you want on lots if you're in a planned unit development, which means you have to leave 50% of the land open. But so the average over the whole property has to be the average for that district, so 1/10 of an acre. But you can go smaller as long as you make it up elsewhere.
If you were just making a house lot in Plainfield and you have sewer on the street, would they charge you a connection fee?
Yes,
And what would they do about that?
and you have to connect.
Yeah.
You can't have a septic system in them.
So are there connection fees built into this project's performance?
No, so these people would have to pay to connect. However, what we did to save money was we included in our design and in the pricing, get utilities to the building envelope, not just to the edge of the property, which will save, and then to include all of the shutoffs and connection boxes. So that would save about between $3,000 and $5,000 for each home. So and then it's much more efficient if the developer building a road adds all the steps in. So that people don't have to dig it up, fill it back in, and then pay for those extra pieces.
And the town's not being developed,
Town is being developer.
so.
And it has made people very nervous.
That's what I was wondering, like, have they approved this yet, or are they still in discussions about the risk associated with?
Well, here's the #1 thing, the #1 issue in Montpelier, Plainfield, everywhere else, is that people basically they don't want development near them. So this has been a massive NIMBY appeal, reaction, this project. And right now that field there's development all the way around it. And they have come up with every possible argument to avoid it. And they are very personally offended if the word NIMBY is used, that it's couched in ecological terms, it's couched in, believe it or not, people saying that this small of a house will raise crime rates in Plainfield. I just find that personally offensive. But you know, there's reason after reason why this is a bad idea, according to people who would rather see it stay a pasture. And it's really unfortunate. So that the best solution is to work with them as soon as possible and really try to build some kind of understanding. Yes. And I think that it's clear that this whole development actually at one point had quite a bit of buy-in from the neighbors, because they understood that someone else could buy it and it could be so much worse. But appeals are, I mean, there was just a 4-unit development that I think it was one building in Montpelier that just got shot down because of an appeal. It just is so easy to appeal. And so all you can do about that is change your zoning ordinance. That's hard too. So when it comes right down to it, Vermonters want more housing, but not near them. Yeah.
I don't want to occupy all the questions, but I have one more.
Okay, and then
Sure, go ahead, take the others first.
Okay.
I was gonna bring up shared equity again.
Yeah.
I don't think that shared equity has a lot going for it. It's got a long history, of course. It's got, I mean, in New York City, there's like a million cooperatives, of course, you know, that makes it for lots of people. There are eco villages around that are cooperatively owned. You can have public, you can have ownership on one level of the kind of site, and then you can so by in that sense, those to have basically ownership of those little plots.
So I would be the first person to say that all of our methods for getting people in houses, we need all of them. It's the whole toolkit. I am sharing concerns that specific people have about people that I'm trying to target to get a house, to get them into us, that they don't want to have a shared equity home for those reasons I shared tonight. But there's a big difference between a shared equity, which is in Vermont, it's a deed restriction, a perpetual deed restriction, versus a standard shared condominium association. So I'm talking specifically about when deeds get restricted perpetually.
Is there any discussion happening around changing that restriction at the state level?
Well, the CHIP TIF has some restrictions in it, but they're 20 years, and that's a lot more palatable than perpetual, that you can't rent the unit. So there are, I mean, I have to say, I know someone who's looking to buy an apartment in New York, and say one building has 10 units, they may restrict how you can rent the apartments inside that building. So that's been around for a long time, you're right. But I'm talking about the Vermont model. But I don't have anything, I mean, they do make it possible to break down a very large older property and have multiple people living there. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't need to be categorically negative about shared equity.
Well, also, if you're owning it, I guess it would be awkward if people own this place and people are living there, and you just come up with covenants and joint. So you're saying Vermont, you can't. It's actually like, even if If the people bought our property and set up shop and had houses and built infrastructure that they legally in Vermont couldn't rent out.
No, no, so the specific shared equity program is run by Downstreet and Evernorth.
Oh.
It's a very, they have a program that has these two deed restrictions in it.
Oh.
And, but no, I mean, we've had communes in Vermont for a long time and they work great. Until they didn't work, but you can do it. I use the example of 10 Stones in Shelburne. That's 10 families buying land together as a cooperative. And then they cut out little postage stamps for the houses. Those are called site condos. And it works great. You can sell your little postage stamp and your share in the whole land. And it's fine. And the group can make any kind of restrictions they want. They can say you can't help put your laundry up outdoors, or you can put your laundry up outdoors.
Yeah,
That's
for what it's worth, I've spent a lot of time in Earth Haven and North Carolina, which has been around for 30 something years, and they have kind of membership level Earth Haven Community Association, and then this taking care of the infrastructure and whatnot. Right. And then their villages or like neighborhoods within that 300 site, for instance, and then their neighborhood. So those neighborhoods are discrete and you just kind of need to join it. And then you buy the property, little, like, you know, you have lots of literally have all kinds of fixed spots, and it's an interesting like play between community ownership and as well as private.
those postage stamps are often called site condos. The condo in the condo documents, it's the perimeter of the very small lot that you put your house on. It might be site condos, it might be something else. But that's a perfectly fine way of it's a perfectly fine way to develop. That the one that I showed on Goddard's campus could become a site condo project.
And they're also completely off grid, like they have a spring water that feeds fire.
That's awesome.
Spring water plus wells and a whole bunch of.
Do they have a communal septic system?
5-gallon buckets.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Vermont has very outdated sewage treatment rules.
Well, there's
really outdated.
Maybe one last right now.
Okay.
But sorry, there are these systems. I have a Phoenix composting system, a Phoenix advanced composting system that works great, you know, and it's maybe you're aware, probably most people are aware of systems, but they take care of climate clarity, story house situation. Got like hundreds of Airbnb already using it. Just it's great.
Okay, my understanding is the more compost soil is used, the better it works.
More compost use.
Exactly. Keep your temperatures up, but yeah, Vermont is, especially when people are living close to each other and the water protection shield starts to overlap the septic, then it gets a little hairy. But let's see. Wait, he had a question.
That's okay. Take all the others first.
Okay.
My question is more generally about homeownership and barriers too. For me and like my partner, we rent. We have generous families who can help us scrape together a down payment, but it's very hard to conceive of the ongoing costs, property taxes, like mortgage seems to be almost necessarily more than rent, maybe not if we're right sizing and getting only what we actually need, but how do you address the sort of ongoing costs of homeownership? And maybe the TIF is a way that that's being addressed.
Well, because in the TIP program, the new homeowner is paying their taxes. It's just that the town's not getting the income. It's getting diverted to pay off the bond. The town agrees to do that for so many years. But you're hitting on a really important question. So the whole equation of home ownership cannot be more than rent. And to get any kind of help from VHFA, for instance, like the first time home ownership, they give you money to buy. It can't be more than a certain percentage of your income. So that it's a very tight equation. And house insurance and taxes and fuel all have to be in that equation as monthly expenses. So that what we've tried to do is get the monthly mortgage down to less than $900 a month. And the usually property tax is something like $300 a month. So together that's $1,200. If you can get a net zero house to work, but small houses hardly use any power anyways, but if you can get that to, if you can, it's really important in these houses to make that whole equation work. Separate from that, so that's like the operating burden. There's also the initial burden. And typically younger would-be home buyers, so people in their 20s, 30s, even now 40s, they don't have enough equity. They haven't been able to save that equity that historically people save because we're spending too much on rent now. So they can't save up enough equity to get over the hump purchasing or of building something. So a municipality can do some pretty cool things. They can give the homeowner, if new houses are a priority for the town, and they should be, they can give a person a second mortgage on the land so that the couple, or the new home buyer, it could be a single person, doesn't have to pay for the land up front. And that if they sell the house in so many years, then they pay that second mortgage. Does that make sense? That's one tool. Another tool is to delay tax pay, to forego, but that messes up chips. Then the construction loan is the big hurdle we're finding in Plainfield. So again, people haven't built up enough equity. So we're trying to get a state to develop a revolving loan fund. And these are, from the state's point of view, tiny amounts of money, particularly compared to the subsidized housing, the apartments. But we're looking for subsidized, a revolving loan fund that would loan out like $150,000 for 6 months. And that's a tiny, for the state, that's a tiny amount of money. But it would make the whole world of difference to someone trying to build a house. Because it's that construction period that you can't get a standard mortgage. And they really don't, ever since the crash in 2008, they don't want to loan people money for construction. So that's the hurdle we're working on right now. We're trying to find out, we have asked 5 of the people on our list to go to the bank and we can work this out together. The Sumsic Bank is offering to cover the construction loan for this supplier called Upend This or Satellite. They're in the brochure. They just built a factory in Barrie, and they have a partnership with Pasumsic, who will subsidize the construction period because they trust Upend This, and it's a saleable thing that if the owner somehow fails, they could sell. It's a prefab, so it could go anywhere else. It has a value. Unlike a stick-built house, if the project fails, that's a disaster for the bank. Like, how are they going to sell a half-built house? I hope I'm not going into too many details and boring people. Stop me if I do. But so the initial land purchase and the construction loan are the 2 major hurdles, and it's all because people can't build equity. So the other thing we've tried to do in Plainfield is, in Plainfield, you're allowed to live in a yurt or a house on wheels more than 6 months. You just have to pay taxes on it. And that's why we had 2 yurt manufacturers at our fair, because there are 12 yurts in Plainfield. And it's not fun to live in a yurt in January. But these people could save money as long as they could get on their land. They could, one person in Plainfield near the project, they spent, I think it was $6,000 on a 200 square foot house, and they trucked it to the site and they camped out in that while they built their house. This is in downtown Plainfield. So if someone can just occupy the land and stop paying rent, they can save money pretty quickly. You're trying to say, the house that this couple is building, they framed it themselves. They hired someone to do the shell, that exterior finishes. That house is gonna cost $80,000. All done. And so if you think about it, $2,000 a month rent, that $80,000, that's 40 months, right? So that's like 3.5 years. So theoretically, not taking into account taxes and other things, power, but theoretically in 4 years, you could save the money to build the house. So that's another option. It's a long-term option, but some people are, and then we could go back to our real roots in Vermont. Who's heard of cordwood houses? I thought they were so cool when I was in my 20s. How about straw bale houses? I have one in my land. There's all kinds of ways to build dwellings that are comfortable in January for not that much money. So if people could just camp on their land, basically, they do have to hook up to the water and sewer. They're going to be there more than 6 months in Plainfield. But that is a way to deal with the cash flow. And all we need to do is we really need 1 or 2 examples of this to show the state government that this will work and that it's a quarter of the cost of those subsidized apartments. Because right now they are dumping so much money into the subsidized apartments. And I'm really hoping we can get, that's why I'm working on Goddard. I'm volunteering my time to get the Goddard project started. And then the other very real issue to get a mortgage for a 1-bedroom house is you need to have 3 comparables to get a conventional mortgage. If you can get a conventional mortgage, does everybody know what that means? It's a Fannie Mae subsidized mortgage, right? The only way you can get that mortgage is if there are 3 comparables in the appraisal. If there's not 3 1-bedroom houses for sale in the last so many months, you have to do a portfolio mortgage. We have 4 banks that have said, and 3 of them are in that, plus the sunset. They're willing to loan, to get this housing problem solved. They will loan you money for a 1-bedroom house. They'll loan money for a 300 square foot house. You can get a HUD subsidized mortgage on that, but it has to be portfolio, and they will do it. They've all committed to doing this. But I want to get to the point where there's so many of these things around that it's not hard to get a conventional mortgage. HUD is not holding us up. The size of the house is not a problem. It's that we don't have enough existing already. So all we need to do is I showed you that example on Goddard's campus. I think it's 3/4 of an acre to get up to 10 houses on it. If we can just find little areas that have water and sewer that can do this, we could build up in central Vermont thank you, yes. And then it would really take off on its own. Thank God if something got done in Warren or Waitsfield, it could count as a comparable. Waterbury does have a couple of these. And hopefully we'll get more.
At the average rate of sale and the overall demand that you imagine for 1-bedrooms, how many would need to be built for it to become a self-perpetuating balanced market for 1-bedrooms to have 3 comparables within 6 months of applied loan?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. We could guess. I don't know.
Just but I guess I'd be curious based on housing stock, what percentage.
Right.
I live in Austin, Texas, and Austin and Houston are kind of notorious for having a disproportionate amount of duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, particularly Austin, when it used to be a college town. So it was there's a odd number of duplexes throughout the southern half of the city. They were mostly for college students, but anyway, this is irrelevant. But it's just relative to any other major city in the country, they have a lot more co and tri housing layouts and systems and stuff. But Most of those are still rentals, but some people own.
I don't know how many, and the other thing is that people with a one-bedroom house, if they have kids, they might wanna either add on to it and then it becomes two-bedroom house. Or they wanna move, so maybe there'd be more turnover for these small houses. At that point, we have to experiment, but I also want, here, I'm gonna show you one more thing from this, and I go back to this for a minute. So I wanted to mention this really cool thing. So these are row houses. They are 100% owned. In Europe, it's called fee simple. Like, they're not condos. They own from sidewall to sidewall. And in Washington, DC, this is pretty common. And, you know, Boston and then Baltimore, we're just not used to it in Vermont because we haven't needed to get that dense. But oh man, I may not be able to find it in here. This always happens when I really need the number, I can't find it. But something like in Washington, DC, the standard lot width is like 16 feet, and something like 80% are less than 20 feet wide. And they just said they have 0 side yard setbacks. So this land use model, we tried to propose that for the country club in Montpelier, and it kind of freaks people out. I cannot find a town in Vermont that has 0 side yard setbacks. But it's ridiculous that they have to all be condos. I'm bringing this up because I don't know what it is like in Austin, Texas. But I mean, if this could be 100% owned all the way to the backyard with a garage and an alley, that'd be pretty nice.
Those are all built for their asphalt and petroleum that are in that, there's no petroleum in that picture.
Well,
Yes.
the neighborhood model on the right, there's a neighborhood called Hyde Park in Austin. It's like 1950s and 60s. It's
Yep.
exactly like that with really small, like 5-foot setbacks and like garages and that elevated cuts through, but the whole, there's like maybe 30 by 20 or 30 by 30 blocks that are laid out like that in the central north portion of the city.
Ocean Springs, that cottage development that I showed you, the standard lot width is 26 feet. And they have really long, deep lots. They're 100 plus, like 120 feet deep. But you could, I know someone who owns a cottage there, and she said it's too deep, like, like way back to your garage. So it could be much shorter. This is a 30th of an acre, and it's a very reasonable lot. 16 feet times 60 feet. I can't do that math. That's 1,000 square feet. That's tiny, but it's completely doable. And in Cottage Grove, or sorry, yeah, Cottage Square, what they do in the interesting is they have about 3 to 5 feet on either side of the house. So you can have a pretty dense neighborhood, and they can be standalone cottages, or they could be these row houses. And as I said, in East Coast cities, they go down to 16 feet lot widths, which I lived for a summer in Georgetown in DC, and we were in a super narrow house. I think that was 14 feet wide. I'm quite sure of that. So, and it was fine. It's a 2-bedroom house. So we just are so used to having a lot of land, and we're used to our buildings not being worth very much. So why not have all of this extra space? That is the culture that we might need to examine to solve this problem. But I did want to make sure could we start talking publicly about the 0 side yard setback idea. I've been suggesting, I've tried that little bit of land in Goddard is actually in East Montpelier. Got a little bit of Goddard goes over. It is zoned for 2 acre. It's agricultural. They evidently didn't realize that had water and sewer. And they said, well, what should we do? And I said, I would actually suggest making a new zone or a new overlay district and call it the priority housing zone or the priority housing overlay district, and don't have any lot setbacks there, because there's a practical matter for a builder that they're going to have for fire separated, or just amount of separation from between people walking in your front porch, like you don't want to be right on it. So the kind of practicality might be enough, but wouldn't it be nice if there weren't any setbacks?
If you wanted any more photos for good examples of layout and structure for tiny home
Yeah.
communities, there's a one called Community First in East Austin that is.
Oh, boy. Hold on, let me get my pen. I may not have a pen in here. It might be in my truck.
We also don't have.
Oh, no
No, we
pen.
do have.
Okay. Well, I have to, yeah, if you don't mind.
So that's,
Okay.
that's okay.
I can't write that on my hand.
Also have a Sharpie on.
Oh, it's okay. This is fun. Oh, wait, what did you say it was called?
Called Community First, but it's an organization of those and fishes. Maybe it's like a religious based organization, but they started a community for the homeless. But
East Austin?
yeah, volunteered there a few times, and they really cool. A lot of volunteer based designers and builders and variety of people, but all the pockets of houses that they build are built in 50 house like density.
Yep.
It's 50 house pockets, and then all of the community oriented stuff is very centralized. It's laid out very comparable to that neighborhood, and the layout's really nice. And it's like it's more oriented for getting people off the street.
Yep.
But everyone has lived there for years, and once they get in and actually get a house, they need to call it their own, and they like get to claim some sort of ownership over it without having to put anything up, or
That's amazing.
they get equity through service in the community itself, and it's a really interesting model.
We need to talk to them. In Montpelier, we're trying to solve this. Believe it or not, it's the middle school children who are leading the effort in Montpelier. They don't want to they don't want to ignore the problem. I will look that up. I'm trying to create a little database of images around the country. It's amazing how there are attitudes similar to this in many other states. Also, like as a subset for transitional housing. Any other topics? We're getting close to 8, but.
Is there a model for this that works if you don't have sewer industry?
I'm working on that in Greensboro, but this is very slow going. So again, the magic number for one well is 24 bedrooms. So that might be 8 3-bedroom houses or 12 2-bedroom houses.
Is there a septic model for that same number of bedrooms?
Right now, it's pretty, drain it all to a mound. Hopefully it's gravity without a pump station. And it can be a shared, but there's the isolation cones. So
certainly
that can't be hydric soil. It is hard.
Yeah.
It is really hard. But the good news about that is if your town that you're working in has PUDs, the septic field counts as open space. So you can put it, you just cannot put it in hydric soils. So in Plainfield, that we naturally had 50% of open space. Whoops. So all of this was wet. All of this is hydric. And all of that is steep. So you could say the building envelope is here. That all counts as open land. This lot goes way into the wetland, but they can't build the envelopes right here. So.
Are you noticing any movements within towns to try and take on these challenges?
So St. Albans all over it, and they have done an amazing job of building up their tax base. There was a small group on that subject at the last big developers meeting, which was a couple weeks ago, and the St. Albans city manager spoke, and it was the highest attended talk in the whole thing. But for the most part, towns are very scared of doing this simple development themselves, very scared. And the fear is that people will not build in time to pay down the bond. And it's a little bit silly because there are two immediate tools that towns have to make sure that people do build in the amount of time that they say that they're going to. There's something called a clawback, which means they have to build it within a certain amount of time, that'd be 2 years. And after that, the buyer has to sell the land back to the town. It's a very simple tool and it works. I worked on a project in Indiana that had that, a clawback clause. And the other is something called a special assessment, where if the person doesn't build the house, then they get taxed as if the house is on the land. So towns have some tricks. I mean, a private developer can't do the second, they can do the first.
That kind of brings up, look, for me, it was floating around all of this stuff, is the sort of sales 101 as far as getting deposits on spec, getting deposits, you know, like the real actual developers do go on. And I can see why the town's not very excited about it's becoming a development effectively. And they'd probably rather have the developer do that. So it's probably awkward for them to act like, you know, then you have to build the infrastructure, the sales team to have the finance side. I mean, it's
well, you said a couple of things right there, which are really important. So the key is a buyer's market, a seller's market, where you could pre-sell everything before you start construction. Then that is relatively safe. And we're in a really good seller's market right now. It would be a disaster if we were in 2008 right now. It just would, because, you know, with the Great Recession, it would be very scary for the town to be in that position. So part of it is just economic market forces. But the other thing is that you do not need a real estate team to sell land. So you need a lawyer to do closings, but that tremendously cuts down. You do not need to have a realtor to sell land. You don't even have to have a realtor to sell houses, but you that knocks off 6 to 10% right there of lost overhead. You don't agree with me?
no, because I'm saying that these are just parts of the process of, if you want the town to do it, the town's gonna need to collect the money, the town's gonna need to sell, it will need to do those activities that
They have to do
it
them.
sounds to me like you're saying that they're gonna just save all that money, but.
No, they have to have a lawyer.
No, but saying they need a salesperson, they need somebody to do the work that developer does, maybe not quite as much, but maybe, or maybe not.
You cannot expect in Plainfield, a town of 1,200 people, that the town treasurer is going to manage all of those books. You're absolutely right about that. But finding someone, and then the other thing is managing the construction. They have volunteers that are going to do it in this case.
They'll probably have to, I'm sure they'll have to create companies and.
Well, part of the grant is to actually hire a project manager. And then that person is going to do the bookkeeping. But you're absolutely right about that. But it is a far sight less expensive than the 20 to 25% that a developer would charge.
And so you run the numbers and you have this.
They do.
That
They do.
illustrates all these kind of.
They do.
And okay, well that's exciting.
Yeah. But if you pre-sold, pardon?
Is that for an individual person or? Is that
No, for the project as a whole, the East Village Advisory Committee has got all of it worked out in very fine detail. So, but in general, if you can pre-sell the lots, you spend a lot less on realty fees. And I think that that's a key point to make.
So how would they work with you when it's a purchase of a good amount of lots? How would they work with you with the town? And how much is the land?
So we don't know yet. It hasn't been really announced, but in the past they talked about these smaller lots being somewhere about 25,000. These larger lots being somewhere around 90. So in other words, these are market, right? And So they could sell, if they don't sell immediately to individual homeowners. A developer could buy a chunk of them and build houses speculatively. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
if a developer buy, let's say 6 lots, do they work with the developer, giving them grants to?
They can. And one thing we've talked about, like someone was interested in one of these lots and then they had some friends so that those 4 new owners could share the cost of excavation and the foundations. So there are a lot of ways to work this. And it could be spread out just as the thing develops. Over, you use one solution here, one solution over here. These 2 lots were of interest to Habitat for Humanity. And there would be an agreement with them. So yeah, there might be like very small development blocks. I didn't bring a picture of some of the designs for Country Club, but if you're talking 300 houses, you could definitely break it down into little lumps.
But usually they give the lots ready to Habitat. So if another person comes and not profit, same.
Yeah, there was at first there was a discussion that Habitat would buy that land, but I don't know if it goes through the grant, they might get it for free. I don't know that. I don't think I answered you. Okay.
And just to reiterate, this is a town, this is a proposal that the town of Plainfield will manage and administer and subdivide and sell off the lots.
Mhm.
The town is like.
Yep, but not build the houses.
Right.
Yep.
Because I live in a place that everybody said there were these big box, like 200, 100, 200 unit places that are stuffing people into, like everybody's complaining about it, and it's hard for me to imagine. Actually, I thought the same idea, to be honest, my personally, but I'm like, so it doesn't seem to come up very often in the town city council kind of conversation. But this seems like a very grounding, it seems kind of, I mean, it's like a quote unquote citizen standpoint, right? Like it seems normal.
It's actually really old fashioned.
Yeah.
So giving you some more concrete examples. I talked to Huntington Homes. They are a prefab turnkey modular. They could, for instance, if there were 4 families that said they would like, they're looking at their financial process and they said they want to work with Huntington Homes. So 4, let's just make up a number, let's say right here. Well, that's 3. Okay, so let's change it to 3. Huntington Homes could work with those 3 families and they could do they do their own foundations. They could strip these 3 lots, which would make it, moving dirt is really hard on small lots. Because I was working on one of these in South Bend and people were putting their dirt on their neighbors. And the neighbor's like, oh, I was supposed to start Monday, but my land is covered with your dirt. So they could maybe put it here. It has to be worked out, but this is not rocket science. But so for instance, these 3 could be Huntington home projects. They would like figure out how to manage that.
Rendering?
Actually I need the rendering. So we took the citizen input and got it ready for permitting. Another example, I mentioned Habitat for Humanity putting 2 duplexes next to each other. Another example would be a small contractor who might buy the 3 top lots along the road and then do multifamily housing there.
Could somebody just, the so-called developer show up and buy all of them?
Not with the lottery system that they were starting to talk about. And they're prioritizing people who are affected by the flood, people who live in Plainfield right now. They're trying very hard to avoid out-of-state speculation on these lots. They're talking about a lottery, like a staged lottery system. But they haven't figured it out.
The flood was last year for context.
Yeah,
I got flooded out. Just a year ago.
We've discussed a whole bunch of things, but I think it got down to waiting to see if the grant goes through.
The mechanism is that the seller gets to decide if they want to sell to the developer, right? I mean, that's You wouldn't necessarily need a mechanism to stop a developer from buying them all, the seller being the town, they just say no.
Except towns fall under different laws than an individual business, and so then they can't discriminate and they can't do all these things, and so actually they're more restricted than anyone else. So it actually makes it probably more complex because it's selling through the town, which is why you have to put in all these caveats and, you know, a system that then sort of tiers the selection.
Well, especially if you're giving away 12 lots, which is the new development. That there's gotta be a very complicated scoring system that spits out the priority for people at the other end. So we've hit.
That was probably let our folks
I'm
know.
sorry, that was so
No,
all over the place.
Thank
No,
you.
this is great.
It's really interesting.
You're welcome to email me if you have any thoughts. And or questions or suggestions, like projects that we could use in our database. And again, we do have some students in Montpelier that want to start working on the transition housing. That's another little pet project. Oh, this is. Yeah, it's like a river. It goes too wide. You don't get anything done. You got to keep it chill. All right.
That's great.
Thank you.